This year has been full of surprises, to say the least, and looking back on 2024, I did not see this coming, that this one camera purchase would alter the course of my street photography journey. But it actually started end of 2023, where I published this video. So I look back on my year in street photography, where I talk about my most used gear, best purchase, worst purchase, and so forth. So I thought, why not continue that tradition and look back on 2024 in terms of street photography. If you want to watch the other videos, they are linked down below in the description. All right, let's get into it. All right, so let's start with my most used gear in 2024 for street photography. I bought this camera in May of this year, and I can just say what an amazing journey it has been ever since I bought it. And I'm of course talking about the Leica M6 that I bought after a lot of consideration and a very hard decision process. I won't go into details of why and how I came to that decision to buy a film camera in 2024. I actually made a whole video about it. It's linked down below and you can go watch that. But I would say that the short answer to buying this camera is that I was at a crossroad in my street photography journey. I wanted to explore something new. I was partly bored with the type of photography I was doing. And I also wanted to grow as a street photographer. And I thought, why not try out film? Because I actually grew up with film photography. So that's kind of the ultra short version of why I bought this camera here in 2024. And the 8 months that I've had this camera, I can say that I've completely fallen in love with film street photography and also being a film photographer. I couldn't be happier that I made the decision, because it was actually a little bit of a gamble when I bought it, because I wanted to buy a film camera for a long time, but I hesitated, but I also wanted a Leica, and I finally made the decision and I bought it, and it could have actually gone either way. So either I would love it or I would hate it. And luckily for me, I ended up loving this camera. But the thing about this camera and being a film street photographer is that I love relearning street photography all over again. I love exploring basic concept of using a camera that is fully mechanical. It has a manual lens, and also using zone focus on a rangefinder. So essentially it's a stripped down experience. It's a bare bones experience of using a camera. So for me, coming from digital cameras that I actually use 90% of the time in my street photography career, I really enjoyed something as analog and simple as this. And I also learned a lot of new things along the way in the short 8 months period that I've owned this camera. So there's been so much to learn that is not only centered around taking photographs. If you're wondering, my most used film stocks until now has been black and white, HP5 Plus, and Kodak Gold so far. But I have a lot of different film stocks that I'm slowly experimenting with. So it's not a final conclusion, but I'm leaning heavily towards black and white photography. Buying a new camera has always come with some kind of change or pivot in my street photography. And first big pivot came in the summer of 2023, where I bought my Fuji X100V. And now in 2024, I had another pivot. And I think it's been coming gradually, where I slowly build on top of the things that I add to my street kit and the way I grow as a street photographer. But this camera has definitely drastically changed my shooting style as well, and also what I like and how I do it, how I perceive it when I go out. So say 5 years ago, I was really into wide apertures like 1.8 up until 2.8. Often I will just hover around those, which is wide apertures. And now I hardly go below f8 with this camera. I used to shoot night street photography. I spend many hours out at night and taking gorgeous photos, silhouette photography, high contrast photography. I just was very much into night street photography. I still am. But what I prefer now is day street photography. I like those raw, intimate photographs that I can make during the day. And also it's a little bit harder to do film street photography at night, but I haven't missed it. And if I want to do night street photography, I just bring my digital camera because it is a little bit easier. So there's been a lot of pivots. I would say I've gone from loving the 50mm and 85mm, the tighter focal lengths normally, to having this 28mm focal length on. So there has been a lot of contrast coming, and I actually started with the Fuji. So I would say my second most used camera has been the Fuji. So this is the Fuji X100V I bought when it was extremely hyped back in 2023. I managed to get my hands on this camera. There was a couple of mixed feelings, but until I realized what the real purpose of this camera was for me using this camera as a street photographer and how I could use it, it really changed how I looked at this camera. And it's one of my favorite cameras to do street photography. I hardly go out with my Sony. I also have a Sony a7C Mark I that is primarily for recording these videos. This camera I can just throw in my bag. I actually brought it to work this summer. It was just so easy just to pack it in my computer bag and just don't worry about there's any scratches on it. It's just such a robust, light, compact camera. And I also had a converter lens. So this is actually a 35mm equivalent native lens that is fixed on this camera, so you cannot change it. So I bought this converter lens as well, so it became a 28mm. And that's actually how the 28mm focal length obsession actually started. And I talk about it on my vlogs as well. I ended up returning the 28mm converter for this because there were some small reflections in it. So I returned it, and then I didn't rebuy it because it was out of stock. And then shortly after, I bought my Leica, where I paired it with the 28mm. This actually has been the gateway into becoming more of a day street photographer, candid street photographer, doing more of this classic street photography, so to say. And there's so many things about this camera that I just love. So this is my second EDC, where my Leica has become my main EDC. So this camera has been the reigning king up until the Leica. But no means is this a retired camera. I just have a different purpose for it than I had when I bought it. All right, so let's talk about my most used lenses. So let's start with the Fuji 35mm equivalent lens. That has been my go-to because it's a fixed focal length camera. So I actually do enjoy the 35mm because this 28mm can be a little bit wide at times. So for my Fuji, that's kind of an obvious choice because that's the only choice I have. And to be honest, I didn't have any desire to buy additional gear for my Fuji because I'm actually quite content with the setup there. And if we move on to my Leica and to the setup that I have, is that it's very simple, and I'm really enjoying the one camera, one lens setup. And as I mentioned before, I bought this Voigtlander 28mm f2 Ultron lens. It's a few years old. It's such a heavy hitter in terms of performance, and there was no doubt in my mind when I decided that I wanted to buy a Leica that I wanted to pair it with a classic street photography focal length. In some people's opinion, that's a 28mm, and also I was by then already so obsessed with the 28 that there was no talk about buying something else. I love this focal length ever since, and it has stayed on my camera. So this lens is such a fantastic little gem. It's made of brass, it's small, and the footprint with my Leica and paired with this is just very small. I just have my lens and my camera, so that's it. All right, so let's move on to the next category, which is best purchase of 2024. And I think you know what I'm going to say is my best purchase, and definitely the Leica M6 is my best purchase, but it's also the most expensive purchase I've made ever in the almost 9 years I've been a street photographer. And I would just say I have no regrets. I had no doubt in my mind. I had a little bit of doubt when I bought the Fuji. I felt like I was a little bit caught up in the hype because it was so hype back then before the Mark VI version. But with this camera, none of that exists in my head. I just love this camera, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to love it also in 10 years. All right, so let's move on to the lens that I teased a few times now. So I actually picked up this gorgeous little lens from Voigtlander as well. It's the Color Scope Bar f2.2. It's in chrome or silver. And the great thing about this lens is that it's also one of my favorite focal lengths. I love the 50mm almost as much as I love my 28mm. It's a very small, compact lens. It's brand new, also a brand new release from Voigtlander. So it's actually one of the smallest 50mm lenses out there on the market. The type of photographs that I'm creating, you have to be very close to your subjects, and sometimes I just don't feel like being very up close and being in their personal space. I just wanted to have a tighter shot, and the 50mm is just great for that because it's also very versatile. And if you want to know what the 50mm focal lengths, how it can be used for street photography, you can watch that video as well, and it will be on the channel as well. All right, so let's move on to the next category, which is best runner-up purchase. And I would say this is a category that is not usual when you think about street photography, and yet there it is always. So I'm talking about my books, and that is both my photo books and my physical books. So this year I actually gave myself a challenge that I wanted to participate or take on the challenge of reading 52 books in 52 weeks. I would say that I was a little bit naive when I took on that challenge, also considering I've never picked up a book more than just one here and there occasionally, or read white papers, mostly for my work. I wanted to challenge myself, and I only actually made 28 books this year, and so that's why the 52 books challenge would continue next year, because what I learned was that I really love reading books. It's my break from my daily schedule. But let's start by talking about my photo book collection. So when I started out, I didn't pay much attention to own photo books. It didn't really resonate with me right up until a few years ago, where I got really sick and tired of social media, the fast pace, the doom scrolling, and also looking at photos in a digital way. And also when you look back on my analog experience, and I wanted to get into that, it actually made sense that I wanted something more analog. And a good way for me also disconnecting from social media, just of personal reasons as well. I found some kind of a solace, so to say, but mostly inspiration from my own street photography when I look at photo books. So this is the recent pickup. It's the Magnum Streetwise, and this is the first book from the Magnum. I think it's a collective. The OG street photographers was a part of one point or another. So for me, collecting photo books and expanding my photo book collection is an ongoing process. I love finding my new purchase. I love deep diving into the street photographer that I'm obsessed with, that I wanted to buy books from, and just getting to know them, how they got into street photography, why they do it, what kind of body work did they produce, does it resonate with me, the style of shooting, and so forth. So there's many factors that goes into buying a photo book, and I actually do enjoy the process leading up to a purchase. So this is actually something I will continue to do also in the new year. So if you want to know what I usually buy on a monthly basis, you can sign up for my newsletter. All the info is down below. And the other part of books is physical books. I also found a lot of inspiration just reading different books, and sometimes they're not related to street photography. I talked about a few of them on my channel because sometimes they do affect the way I think about street photography, can draw inspiration from and put that into my street photography. When I have the time in my vlogs, I do take the books and make a review from a street photography perspective. So that's how I kind of include that in my street photography world. So I have a few cases. So I have this Kodak film case. So this is for my film rolls, and I bought it. It's not the best purchase. It's a little bit heavy and it's a little bit dense. It's gorgeous to look at, but it's not very practical. Another great purchase I made is also a film case. So for my film roll, this is a small leather pouch that can hold up to 3 film rolls. This is from a Swedish company called Square Hood that you probably know much better. I love my small leather goods. I have a few camera bags. I have different sizes, but my most used up until now has been the Wandered 3-liter sling. I think it's called Rogue. They renamed it at some point. I will write it down. But sometimes it's just too big and I don't want to carry an extra lens. I just want to have a minimal setup, which has basically been the theme of this year. So I ended up buying a camera bag called the 157 Essential Sling from a brand called Grams 28. And it's a pure Italian leather, the small essential bag, because it could hold a small mirrorless camera, and to my luck, my Leica can also be fitted into it. And that bag is just big enough to carry that while not looking like a camera bag. So that's kind of the main appeal of that bag. So that's my other essentials that I bought. Up next is my 2025 gear wish list, and as I was writing the script for this video, I realized that I didn't have a very long wish list, and that's contrary to the last 2 years where I had a lot of lenses, a lot of focal lengths, and a lot of camera gear I wanted to buy, and I only could muster up one thing that I wish for next year or maybe the year after that, is that I want a Leica lens. I want the 28mm, of course, because I'm obsessed with that, but for the life of me, I cannot convince myself to buy it, at least not right now. But I want a Leica lens for my Leica camera because I want the complete Leica setup. Let's see how next year progresses. I can convince myself to buy it. But right now, I don't have any other focal lengths. I don't have any other camera gear. I might buy small, essential pieces of gear here and there, but not like big purchases that I'm really dying to buy. And luckily for me and my wallet. Let's move on to the next category. What should I do more of in 2025 for street photography? So I just want to do a quick recap of what I wanted to do going into 2024. I wanted to go on more photo walks. I wanted to make a daily habit or go out as much as possible. I wanted to explore film photography, to travel more, to make more vlog style videos. But if we start with the film street photography, I wanted to continue to explore film photography. I want to practice more. I want to become better as a film street photographer. There's so much for me to learn. I'm on a journey of exploration, of discovery, and now I finally went into home development, black and white film at home, and I just started out. I want to really explore that in more depth going into the new year. And I also want to travel more. So I definitely want to go on shorter trips around Europe. So those long weekends, this is something I want to prioritize. One thing I also wanted for a very long time that I thought about is create digital zines. Talked about in my newsletters that it's been on my mind for a long time. I want to make a street photography guide of Copenhagen, my beloved city. I eventually also want to make a photo book of my street photography, but that's more of a long-term project. I don't have a need to produce it right now because I still feel like I'm learning street photography. I don't have something that I have a burning desire to put out there, where zines are a bit more casual, I would say. So I did manage to set up my web shop that I've had on my to-do list forever. So my web shop is set up for prints. I have a few prints for sale now. And as I go on, I make my digital products. I will put them on my web shop. I have a lot of plans for that web shop and all that digital product side of things. I would like to continue to do photo walks. So I made a really great habit this year of taking the time to go out on photo walks. And now when I go out and not having my camera, and the very few occasions I see something and I'm just like, no, why didn't you bring your camera? I still want to continue with my analog activities, and those are the things that I talked about. I write my newsletters, I have my blog, my 52 books, 52 weeks challenge. I have other analog activities as well, and I'm really enjoying the whole analog experience. I also had a category where I talk about how many photos I've taken in this year, and I would say I have two different mediums now. I have digital and I have film. So let's start with the film. I shot around 25 rolls of film since May, so not the entire year, but that equals to around 900 frames, and that's based on a roll of 36 frames. Sometimes I use a 24, so that's a rough number, the 28 frames. Digitally, I've used Fuji, and the shutter count is 5,600. I think I've shot around 2,000 shots with my Fuji this year. So that's quite a lot of shots. So around 3,000 shots this year. That's not a bad thing. But I haven't been that trigger happy because I think the count was significantly higher last year. But that's with digital. It doesn't cost as much like with film. Let's move on to key learnings. I just go with the flow in terms of I don't overthink things. I'm a little bit of an overthinker. I do analyze things a lot before I really decide I want to do this. Now I just do it. I do a little bit of research and I just venture into it. And that's actually been a really nice experience. The result might vary, but that's how we learn, right, as street photographers. So so the mantra for this year has been just do whatever you want to do and then take it from there. And that's been quite liberating. So let's wrap up this video and wrap up this year. The Leica M6, this analog film camera, has completely changed the course of my street photography for the better. I'm thoroughly enjoying street photography because for the last few years I hadn't been enjoying street photography as much as I did when I was learning it many, many years ago. And it actually brought a lot of joy back into my life. The thing with this camera is that maybe it's because it's a new camera, is something that I'm always learning when I pick it up. When I don't go out with a camera, I really missed it and I love this feeling. I want to hold on to this feeling of wanting to pick up my camera and just be able to run out on the streets. So that's my year in street photography for 2024. All right, take care. I'll see you in the next one.